Welcome to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast for episode 334. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Grand Theft Auto 6 is being delayed to 2026, another round of EA layoffs, Xbox joining the tariff price jumps, and much more. So this week was a good reminder, or at least the last week or so, a good reminder that good games can come out and, you can have fun with gaming and, related activities while the industry is still a hot mess. It's not one or the other, right? It's not that there's all these layoffs and there's this and that. And that means that there's no good games. There's definitely good games coming out. As proof of the last, couple months, if not last couple years, really. With the backdrop of, especially in the studio developer side of things, a ton of instability and things like that. We'll talk about that here in a bit with the EA layoffs, but we're also going to talk about a little bit with the journalism side of the industry being in trouble. Giant Bomb effectively is shutting down, or at least has lost its major people because of a big shift their venture capital owners want to make. And then Polygon got sold off and most of the staff fired. I have some relatively controversial opinions about some of that may not be super popular, but I think it's a fair statement to give. But regardless, at the end of the day, for everyone who gets laid off, anyone, because who knows, it could be me one day, I hope they land on their feet, even if I have, some varying opinions about things. It's just weird times, to have an industry where games like Expedition 33 or Baldur's Gate 3 or even Avowed and some other games I've had fun with recently can exist, while also those devs can never be positive that they'll have a job tomorrow. And it's even if they made some of those games, even if they made great games. The Baldur's Gate people over at Larian are probably fairly safe. They, Sven, the CEO over there, he's said a little too much for them to ever have layoffs because it would come off as a bit hypocritical. But what they're doing over there seems to be smart, and I hope the rest of the industry can learn, especially from people like Sandfall Games who made Clair Obscur. And I hope that maybe the industry side of things will start to match the product side of things, which I think has been pretty impressive. So there's the opening thoughts for this week. Okay, let's get into the gaming news. Let's kick it off with probably the biggest story of the year, at least so far. Grand Theft Auto 6 has been delayed to May of 2026. They put out a statement, Rockstar themselves did, and kind of giving you the normal corporate gobbledygook of why they are doing something. What's interesting about it is Jason Schreier also put out a statement about it, saying that no devs that he had talked to anytime recently thought that this 2025 date was ever going to happen. So it sounds like it was pretty much known that they were never going to make it this year. I don't know what 2K's fiscal year is. I assume it goes from May to April or something like that. Or April to March or whatever it is. So it's coming next year. What's interesting is that for games like Fable and stuff that delayed till next year, presumably for their own reasons, are probably now kind of looking at the calendar being like, ooh, maybe we need to release January 1st then and try to, I'm sure there's plenty of analytics and studies done and all of that. They know if Grand Theft Auto 6 comes at the end of May, then most games probably know they need probably a month of space, right? So we're probably going to see a ton of games come out in March and April, and maybe even the beginning of May. But it will be very interesting to see that release calendar and see how much people stay away from Grand Theft Auto 6, because everyone knew everyone was going to. It's been a known quantity. But we're also in a situation where there's games coming out every month that are big and good, right? So you can only avoid other big and good games so much. And at some point, you can't let other companies and other games dictate your own strategy. So, last week on Xbox, we had the situation of Xbox had their Oblivion remake or remaster, forgive me, come out. And then just a couple days before Clair Obscur Expedition 33, not a Microsoft game or a Bethesda game, even though the Oblivion was a third party remaster, but still. But Clair Obscur had a marketing deal with Xbox. It was on all platforms, but you mostly saw it talked about and put on Xbox, and it's done fine. So I think at the end of the day, a game just being good is probably the most important part. And that sounds so simple. And it's not always been true. We know that, like Titanfall 2, I think, the single player, one of the greatest ever, and honestly, a really good multiplayer game that got lost in the sauce of Battlefield and some other titles that came out right around it. And to this day, people still, kind of crap on EA for letting it kind of, starve on the vine like that. So I don't know, the whole discussion about timing and marketing and all of this with gaming is so pointless because it seems like such a imperfect science. It seems like, sometimes games don't advertise until like a week before they come out and they do really well, or sometimes they have 6-month campaigns and they don't do very well still. And something, you have a situation like Dragon Age of the Veilguard last year that obviously had a huge marketing campaign with Game Informer, and then like a month into it, Game Informer shut down and deleted all of the content they made for the game as well as everything else. So I just, like I've even had frustration. Unfortunately, I've even like lost connections with other people over, conversations about this where I, maybe a bit too aggressively stated things like, we don't know what we're talking about because the people who get paid millions of dollars to do this stuff don't even really know. They're just going off analytics and what they've done before and things like that. Um, I just, I think it's all very interesting, and more than anything, it's like kind of just nice to have a date for Grand Theft Auto. So it's like, okay, in a year I'll play Grand Theft Auto. Until then, what am I going to be playing? I'm going to be playing the next Battlefield. I'm going to be playing probably Fable, Outer Worlds 2, and I'm sure a handful of next Call of Duty, and a handful of other things I am not remembering at the moment, and that's kind of comforting. But I really do think it's going to be so interesting to see this next like month and see how many games get announced for the second half of 2025 or like the first quarter of 2026, because I bet it's going to be a ton, because I think a bunch of companies, even big AAA companies, have been kind of sitting on their hands waiting to find this out. And we may see some of it trickle out here in the next couple weeks, but you have to remember that the time frame formerly known as E3 is coming up really soon, in about a month, and I bet we're seeing a bunch of trailers getting recut right now, a bunch of stuff being changed, where companies are like, "Oh, okay, yep, we're coming out in November," because the big thing is it opens up the holiday season for a bunch of games and companies. Nintendo is probably praising the Lord right now because now they can really push that, the Christmas season with their new console and new games that will be coming out for it and things like that. Um, we'll see about PlayStation and Xbox with their pricing and stuff like that. We'll get into that here in a minute, but yeah, interesting story. It's in Grand Theft Auto for me is interesting. I really, really, really enjoyed um Vice City and 3 and San Andreas and 4. And man, I might have played 5 hours or so of 5 and just couldn't do it. I hated the characters, and I know you're supposed to, at least like they're supposed to be flawed characters, right? But I still didn't like them, even understanding that. I really, 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 really hate when games basically force you to switch between protagonists. It was one of my few complaints about Assassin's Creed Shadows is I really hated that you couldn't just play the game as one of them. I ended up by the end of the game appreciating both characters and playing as them, but I never felt that with Grand Theft Auto 5. I really, really, really didn't like it. which was weird. Because I love Rockstar games. I loved all of the Grand Theft Autos before, even the old top down pixel ones. And even like Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably still my favorite game ever, even though that's definitely been challenged here in the last few years. So it's interesting times, but we have a date for Grand Theft Auto, and honestly, that's been coming for so long. Is that it's like such a strange feeling to be like, oh yeah, we know when that game is coming now. Weird. What's not so weird because it's so familiar is that EA has laid off 300 to 400 employees through various reporting this week. We found out and their own announcement that Respawn lost around 100 developers and canceled 2 early stage projects. The initial reporting of this was like they canceled Titanfall 3. It doesn't appear that that's what they did. It looks like one of those early projects was a Titanfall extraction shooter, which is just we'll talk about Arc Raiders and Marathon and Tarkov here in a little bit, but man, it should be very telling that they canceled that project. I think that was probably a good idea. I think any effort they put into that should have just been put into Titanfall 3, but there's a reason I'm not an executive, I guess. Codemasters also appears to be getting reduced in some capacity. Their social media channels are gone. We found out that they're no longer going to be working on Dirt or WRC games, which I believe is World Racing Circuit or something along those lines. I think it's like the off-road racing. And, if you follow me, if you check out this podcast, I assume you are likely a Mass Effect fan. So if you've been paying attention to BioWare and stuff, as far as I can tell, BioWare came out unscathed from this. It was other parts of the company. Not that that makes it any better for those people, but if you're like me and you're interested in BioWare and hoping that they can stick around long enough to make another Mass Effect game, I think they're safe. I hope. I follow a lot of people who are still currently working there, as well as people who used to be there. And it doesn't look like, as far as I can tell, any of them got laid off either. So people work on like Battlefield, on the Iron Man game, even on Skate. As far as I can tell, all of those teams were unaffected. So if you can try to get a silver lining out of a story like this, I guess that's it. One of the interesting reactions to these layoffs was the conversation around their CEO, and the conversation around it was Andrew Wilson. He made $25 million in 2024. And the big conversation whenever this happens is people being like, oh, he makes 25 million and they still laid off 1,000 people in the last year or whatever. Like these conversations make sense, and I'm not here to dispute them and to tell people they shouldn't complain about that. Fair game, right? Obviously. But I do think just for the simple, just for wanting gamers to understand the industry better, from all the people I've talked to who are in the industry as developers, as high level, studio folks and things like that, it's they could have paid Andrew Wilson $100 a year, and those layoffs probably still would have happened. EA could have made twice as much money last year, and these layoffs probably still would have happened, because these decisions, as I'm told, are very, very rarely ever made in such broad sweeping ways. It's not, because they gave Andrew Wilson a $5 million raise. Well, now they have to fire $5 million of people. It's, the corporations, at least the ones I've interacted with and am knowledgeable on, don't operate that way. They operate, where like every team is their own little business and things like that. And it doesn't sugarcoat this. It doesn't justify layoffs. It doesn't justify these hyper rich companies doing what they do. And it doesn't justify someone making $25 million a year. But it also doesn't really explain it. And like $25 million a year is insane. No human being needs to make that much money. But when you consider that last year EA made like 7 point something billion dollars, $25 million is absolutely nothing to a company making $7 billion a year. Just like the salaries of the people they laid off, at least in the short term, It's pocket change. Not really that big of a deal to the company as a whole. But when you break it down to studio and department and things like that, and you start to realize that these studios get their individual budgets, there isn't just a pot of $7 billion sitting there that everyone gets to take from as they need it. They run each of these studios like little businesses, even to the point where right now we know that EA is split up into sports and then everything else. And I'm willing to bet that the sports studios get a lot more leeway than the other ones do. And so, you just can't look at these choices and like vagaries, if that's even a word, or generalities, where it's like there's just more to it. That there's and to reiterate, doesn't excuse it. It doesn't make it any better to say that for these people who lost their jobs and their livelihoods and maybe moved across the country or to another country to get these jobs and then they lose them. One of the awful stories from Respawn was that the day before, so the layoffs happened on Thursday, I believe, on May 1st, the last day of April, they announced a new Apex character, a new fighter that's going to be added. And the next day, the lead writer for that character got laid off, right? That sucks. There's no excusing that. You can't justify that, right? Someone who just was productive, who just created content that you're going to release as new, that you're going to take battle pass payments for so people can play as them and unlock their skins and all that crap. It's inexcusable, right? But I think sometimes people get a little too focused on things that maybe aren't actually at fault because it's just easy or it just makes sense or there's a face to yell at. Andrew Wilson is easy to yell at because he looks like a oh my gosh, a Hunger Games villain. Like he looks like he would be the president that would take over after Snow and would be even worse. Like he looks like a robot designed to be an antagonist in a story, right? Like, so I get it. And he's Australian and you know what they say. I have no idea what they say, but it actually, I think being Australian makes them seem less evil because they have such like sweet accents, I guess, or at least to me they do. So anyways, sucks to see all those layoffs. Selfishly happy it didn't affect the people I interact with directly, but Respawn is also one of my favorite studios. And if people want a Titanfall 3, that lessens those chances big time. If you're excited about that next Jedi game coming out, the final game in that trilogy, it's probably not looking great for that either. It certainly won't, it's going to affect that game in some capacity. And if you're still playing Apex, I'm sure it's not going to help there either. So best of wishes to all of those people. In another story of just excitement and joy, Xbox is raising prices on all their consoles and accessories. So they made this official announcement, some of the examples of the price jumps, and this is uniquely to like PlayStation. This is in the US and all other territories, as far as I can tell. That in the US, the Series X with a disc drive is going from $499 to $599. The digital edition, I believe, was $450, and now it's going to $550. The Series S, the minimum, the 512 gigabyte model, is going from $299 to $349. I don't think that's right. I'm pretty sure it's $380. Actually, I think I typoed there. And then the Series X Special Edition 2 terabyte, which was $599, which honestly wasn't a terrible deal because if you consider a $500 Series X a decent deal, because the extra gig is what you're going to pay for anyways, or the extra terabyte is what you'd pay $100 for that anyways. So you just get this like kind of cool looking console. It's going from $599, which was okay, to $730, making it almost as much, I think, as the PS5 Pro, which is wild. Because even though I think the PS5 Pro is a bit, has been talked about a little dishonestly, it still is more powerful. We know that from the things that we've seen with the patches they've released for it and stuff. Like it is a more powerful piece of hardware, albeit with unique methods, right? But this base Series X being almost the same price is pretty nuts. And I think that the PS5 Pro has 2 terabytes as well. So Then I think controllers went up to like $65 or something, which actually isn't that bad. I think they're currently 60, so it's not too awful. The reaction to this has been interesting. My own reaction is frustration. I understand that Xbox is kind of getting away from being like hyper focused on selling consoles. That's obvious, right? They still need to sell consoles though, right? Like it's not like they just can't sell them. One of the things that is interesting is I've seen a lot of chatter over the last couple of years that apparently at least Series X's are kind of hard to come by. So that's kind of a whole different issue. But for a couple of years now, I've been preaching like, man, there's no way. Like at this point, why not just discount and undercut PlayStation and sell the Series S for like 250 and sell the Series X like the base model or digital or whatever for like I don't know, like $300, 350 maybe, and we're going the opposite direction. So I mean, it's weird, 4 or 5 years after a console comes out, this is when you know, with the last gen, it's when you saw like the PS5, the PS4 Slim, or the what was it, the Xbox One S, right? Where it was still an Xbox One, but it was slimmer and had like I think a more efficient processor, and then they had the One X, right, as like kind of a beefy model. And instead, and those were cheaper, right? And instead, now we're getting a $100 jump in price on a 5-year-old console that hadn't had a price drop yet. So you can blame lots of things. I'm sure tariffs are a part of this. It's, at least for Americans, but they raise the prices everywhere. So it's obviously other stuff. The tariffs could still apply there because, it's likely the manufacturing of these things are getting more expensive because of tariff issues or just trade problems or just general economy issues. But there's also for sure a hint of selfishness, right? Of greed, as everyone's going to want to say. And, like that's a weird thing because it doesn't seem like Xbox is really pushing to get people to buy these consoles that hard at this point. They're out there and they advertise them, and I love my Series X. It's been a really good piece of hardware. It's most of my computer at this point is newer than 5 years, and I paid a lot more than $500 for it. So it's been a great deal. I play on it all the time. I play a ton of games on there. But, this isn't a good look, especially because PlayStation, while they did a few weeks ago raise their prices as well, they haven't done it in the States. And they absolutely will now, especially. They're going to. I saw someone post, like, oh, I guess the PS5 Pro is a better deal after all. It's like, well, I mean, it's still $150 more than a Series X. While, arguably not being $150 better, that's obviously very subjective, but I would find it extremely hard to believe that we won't in the next month or so get a press release from PlayStation of them being like, oh, sorry fellas and ladies, we actually need to raise our prices too, and the PS5 goes to 600 as well. And man, I don't even know what the PS5 Pro would be if they raised it. It'd be like $900 probably if it raises a similar amount. I mean, like $1,000 for a PS5 Pro. And then, something I mentioned before I move on from this to people is that, like, so the answer to people in the back of your mind is gonna be like, oh, well, maybe now I finally will go PC. Well, unfortunately, if you want to get, it used to be with PC that, getting used parts or old GPUs and things like that wasn't that big of a deal. And you still can do it, but that's not how I roll. For the most part, I want new stuff because I want the warranties. I want all that, right? And I'm at a point where if someone wanted to build their own computer, I would have a hard time recommending anything below $1,500 or $1,600, just knowing all the basic prices of stuff right now. And that's if you build your own. If you buy off the shelf from HP or Dell or whoever, you're looking at probably $2,000 for a decent computer. Not even like a top of the line one. You're looking closer, probably $4 or $5 grand for that. So it's getting to this conversation, and I put out a video about it on my YouTube about this affordability issue that our fun little hobby that used to be affordable is not looking like that anymore. At least not if you want to be on the cutting edge. So I think that sucks. And I also think it sucks. The reaction to this has been interesting. Like, obviously, some people were kind of weird about the price of the Switch 2 because it jumped in price a lot. The Switch is $300 and the Switch 2 is 450, and it's a little more powerful, but it's not, 50% more powerful, or at least, however you would decide to measure it. And then the PS5, they did raise their prices in non-American regions. And they will raise their prices here. They're definitely going to let Xbox take the brunt of the bad PR. And then they'll slip out a press release here in a few weeks and have some kind of price jump themselves for, like I said before, for legitimate and maybe somewhat greedy reasons. So it sucks. I think what scares me the most is thinking about what the next consoles are going to cost and what the next GPU is going to cost and all of this stuff. We have a situation where, the next Xbox or the PlayStation 6, they could be $750+ like from the jump. And that's hoping that they're going to keep subsidizing them the way they have. I'm sure PlayStation will. They're still so focused on hardware sales. But as Xbox de-emphasizes hardware sales, and they still put out something and they still want people to buy it, but maybe they aren't willing to take a hit. Maybe they aren't willing to break even and sell it at cost, right? Maybe they want to make some money off of it. They know they aren't going to sell 100 million of them. So if they're going to sell 25 million of them, maybe they want to, tack on $100 onto them and recoup some more of that money. We'll have to wait and see. I am very curious. Speaking earlier about the game industry and the games journalism industry, Giant Bomb and Polygon are both in trouble. So Giant Bomb is being temporarily held back. Jeff Grubb and Dan Reichert have both officially left. Mike Minotti, who's another one of their personalities there, who's a contributor, is no longer contributing at Giant Bomb. And it's assumed that the vast majority of the front-facing staff there is gone. It's supposedly the venture capitalist company that owns them is going to try to, its fandom is going to try to turn them into a guides website. So I'm sure people who just need jobs will stay and make some of that content for them. But as I already said, the more notable people there in Jeff Grubb and Dan Reichert are both gone already, and we'll see what they end up doing. And then Polygon got sold off to a new venture capitalist company, just like they do, and most of the staff got laid off. So maybe they'll reappear in some AI objectively evil way, or but we'll have to wait and see. This whole thing is weird to me. Giant Bomb is the only one. I used to watch them a lot. I haven't so much in the last couple of years. I started watching them because I watched Jeff Grubb a lot when he was at GamesBeat still and was doing his Jeff Grubb podcast with him and Mike Minotti. And then I kind of migrated to Giant Bomb when Jeff Gerstmann left there and they brought in Jeff Grubb and some of these other personalities. And I got into it for a little bit and then I kind of wasn't anymore. And what was interesting about them is that you had someone like Jeff Grubb, who was a journalist at GamesBeat, right? Had pretty good connections. If you're an EA fan, he's a good person to follow. He seems to have some pretty high level contacts there. His info for that publisher is often pretty good. But as he and the others transitioned to Giant Bomb, they went from journalists to content creators, right? To entertainers, more so. And that definitely, at least in my opinion, affected a lot of their takes and some of their reporting and stuff. My big thing with them is I saw a lot of their reaction from the gaming community in general, but especially their own fans of how could this happen? And one thing to keep in mind is if you go look at Giant Bomb's live streams and their videos, they get 3,000 or 4,000 views, and they've had a few will jump up a bit higher, like the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal and stuff was a little bit higher for them, but not much. The numbers they were getting from what I've seen over the last almost 10 years of me being a hobbyist content creator, their numbers likely wouldn't even sustain one person being a one person show. And doing everything they did and getting all their numbers would likely maybe not even be a full-time job for one person, money-wise. And so then you think about it, they have this huge team of, front facing people, back end people, producers and editors and all this stuff. And like, this is likely not a channel that could even sustain one person, let alone this whole big team with, a lot of equipment and a lot of content and all this stuff. And so like when I saw people be like, I can't believe this, I'm like, how? Like they weren't getting, they had no motion. They weren't getting views. They were getting a couple thousand views of video or live stream. Like that's not very many. You need tens of thousands every single time. For example, I have a video from, I think 2 years ago, maybe 3 now. It's my highest, viewed video. It's 15,000 views. It's not really that many, but it's more than most of their videos. And in 3 years, that's made me $19.23 or something. My rates are lower than theirs probably, and they have sponsors and ads and all that. I'm sure that stuff adds up, right? But if a video only gets 5 or 10,000 views, you're talking about like $5 or $10. And if they're doing live streams and that, they're not putting that much time into them. But even like when you see like a small content creator make a video that's like 2 hours long about the entire lore of some franchise, and it gets like, 5,000 views, like they spent, maybe dozens, if not hundreds of hours on that video, and they're going to make like $10 on it. And for someone like me, that's fine. It's all good. I'm not making this stuff to make money. If you want to become a member on my channel or subscribe to me on Twitch or, buy a coffee mug or something from me off of YouTube, like that's cool. I'll take the couple bucks. I'll use it to improve something here, but I'm not going to quit my job. Right. I have a full-time job. I work full-time. I take care of a little girl. I, spend time with my wife. I'm a married guy. Like I have a family, and so do a lot of these people that work there. And I think what it's kind of come down to when I've looked at all of this, like I saw one of the people be like, well, I like covering games and that's what I'm going to do. And it's like, that's cool, man. But there's a really good chance that you may need to have a real job. like your hobby and your personality may not sustain you in a house and multiple children and insurance and this and that. And I think that, like, I don't know if it was COVID or just kind of streamer delusions or whatever anyways, but there's so many people. I think COVID was a big part of it because there was a big spike in people who were able to, kind of make a living doing it. It's just not that sustainable. And it's because there's not a lot of room. I've talked a lot about game journalism and that it's a small club and you're not wanted. Like if you really think about it, there's like 50 games journalists. And then there's a bunch of other people who write articles, but there's like 50 games journalists, and there's like Jason Schreier is like the one legit journalist, I think. And I don't even like him that much, but I think he's the most like legit journalist in gaming, right? And then you have all these other people doing it, and everyone thinks they can do it. And then and now what's going to happen is someone's going to start a Patreon, or they already have, I think. And they're going to try to do their own little show. And a lot of excitement will drum up, and they'll get a bunch of Patreon subs for a couple months. And then that's going to drop off because the economy is rough. People don't have any money. Maybe, the kind of most uncomfortable part about all of this is that not everyone is interesting enough or talented enough to do this stuff as a job. A lot of the people who do it as a job, I don't think really are great journalists and aren't really that interesting and don't really have, very unique takes. Like you have entire podcasts and shows and content creators who like their entire thing is reporting what other people have reported. Like that's not sustainable in the long run because you're not doing anything original. Personality and stuff like that can only take you so far. And so I think when we start seeing these people falling off of these big, more traditional, outlets and trying to do their own thing, and a lot of them don't succeed, it's because maybe they kind of overestimated how interesting they are or how much of a pull they really have when they're no longer at Giant Bomb or IGN or, whatever company. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the fallout from this. Again, like I said before, I hope everyone lands on their feet, whether I like them or not. And it's going to be interesting to see, where everyone ends up. And I hope that it's all, I hope they all end up in a good place. Last few stories here. Arc Raiders Test 2 is out, and I've played it quite a bit. It is super fun. They have come so far with it. It's no longer NDA'd. It looks great. It's one of the prettiest games I've seen in quite a while. It looks really good. And I play on Series X. I'm pretty sure it's doing like ray tracing and stuff. It's Unreal Engine 5, I believe. The textures seem really high quality. Like, it's weird how good it looks, and it's definitely 60 FPS. Like, it's running well. So I'm sure it looks even better on PC, on a nice solid PC, but I've been very pleasantly surprised with how this game looks. The loop is pretty simple, and I think that's a big benefit to it. You have a stash full of weapons and stuff, and you have these quests that you're trying to complete by collecting certain things or going certain places during these raids. And during the raid, you're fighting these robots, which are like hard to fight, and you could be fighting other people, and you can get dominated very quickly by them. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find stuff or do things to complete these quests to get more experience and upgrade your character and your base and everything more. And, once you collect all those things from this world, from the various maps, then you extract. And you have to sometimes fight for that extraction with other teams. And then if you kill them, you take their stuff. And it's that Tarkov idea, right? But it's a third person game. It's got this kind of retro futuristic, I don't know how to describe it, like 80s vibe almost. And just the aesthetic of it. The sound design in this game, from the sounds of the enemies to the gun sounds, even the voice, the VoIP, the voice over IP, that it like accurately, if someone's in the next room, you'll hear them like muffled because of the walls, and you'll hear like, it's interesting. So say you're in a hallway, and from you facing it, it goes off to your left, and then there's a doorway on the right. Or no, here's a better example. You're standing in a hallway, big long hallway, and down the hallway on the right, there's a door in a room. And if there's someone in that room VoIPing, I think, and someone at Ubisoft told me that this tech was being worked on, and I could see it being done in Unreal Engine 5. I think they're using like ray tracing for sound, because I noticed that if you heard sounds in that room, you would hear it from like your left, because the sound is coming out of the room and hitting the hallway wall and then coming to you, and less of it is coming the other way. So even though the thing is happening on the right, so you have to start thinking almost like in real life, where like it happens to me sometimes, where we'll have there'll be a noise outside our house, and we'll have a window open like on my left side, even though the thing is happening to my right, but those windows are closed. And it's kind of that, as a normal person, you learn to anticipate those things and figure them out. But in a video game, you often don't have to do that, because in video games, sound is often just directional. If you hear it that way, then it was that way. So yeah, Arc Raiders has some really cool stuff going on. This game feels so close to done. I suspect it comes out sometime this year, very likely this summer. That wouldn't surprise me at all. And I'm excited for it. I'm trying not to play it too much now, because I don't want to be annoyed when I have to play it again, assuming none of my stuff will carry over. So that was cool. I got into Marathon yesterday. I got a code, and I fired it up, played a couple rounds. Man, I don't like that game. It looks neat. Like, it has a cool, like, kind of Apex Legends kind of aesthetic, but like even more futuristic and whatever. But the actual gameplay, so I've played Tarkov almost 3,000 hours. I've played, even like kind of older extraction games, if you call them. Extraction games really are the evolution of battle royales, right? So even back to like the Division survival mode and stuff, like I've played a ton of these games, PvP mostly. And my issue with Marathon is it just doesn't feel good to play. I know Bungie always gets like all of its flowers for its gunplay and stuff. I think the gunplay in this game feels okay. It's kind of inconsistent, at least in my opinion. The movement feels terrible. The walking speed, like the non-sprinting speed, is like, it's not slow, but it still feels clunky. And then the sprinting is like okay. But what's really killing me about it, I think more than anything, is that I don't know why, and Bungie's the worst about it, that some of these companies, especially Bungie, thinks that people on a controller want to use a mouse. And I'm telling you, if I am on a console and I am using a controller, I don't want a cursor that I have to, swing around. And you can have that. Like Assassin's Creed does that, right? Like you can have a cursor, but as soon as you hit your D-pad, it converts to that, and you can use your D-pad to go around. At least right now in Marathon, you can't do that, and it's annoying and it's clunky in the like game menus, but it's straight up bad. It feels terrible in game because it still does that. So a big thing about extraction games is that you go, into a building and you need to loot that building. So there's a bunch of boxes with stuff in it. So you run up to a box, and one of the things that drives me nuts is that you don't just hit X, or at least on Xbox, the left pad button. You have to hold it down for like an extended amount of time. And then it opens, and then a cursor pops up right in the middle of the screen. And you would think that there'd be a button to like take all or something. And maybe there is. If I missed it, you can yell at me in the comments. But as far as I could tell, there isn't. But then you also can't just hit like the pickup button. You have to move the cursor over to the item and then hit pickup, and then do that on all the items that are in there. And in an extraction game, especially a game like Tarkov, but even some of these other ones that are coming out, you like that is wasted valuable time, and it doesn't like, it's not intuitive. It doesn't feel good, because if you could just use your D-pad and hit it, and it would just default to taking you to selectable areas like any console game should, it would feel, at least in my opinion, a lot better. If at least it would start the cursor on the box that you're opening, and then you could quickly kind of pick things up. So that's stuff that could be improved. But there's just, man, yeah, I didn't like that game. I didn't enjoy that experience very much. I've played way more of Arc Raiders and obviously of Tarkov. And I can give Marathon more of a go for sure. And I plan to. But man, that game, I just, Arc Raiders gave me that feeling of like, oh, people who like Tarkov will like this. Arc Raiders is much more casual than Tarkov, which I think is a big selling point. I don't think that it's going to be the same reaction for Marathon. And I've seen some of the big content creators from Tarkov, like Pastilli, talking about Marathon and being like, like it's neat, but it's neat in the way that like I'll try it out and never play it again. And then they're going to charge for it, and I think that's rough. We'll see. I'm not as excited about Marathon. Far Cry 4, released 10 years ago, has gotten a patch to give it 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5, and that's cool. I don't know why they're doing that. I'm curious to what the deal is. It was interesting because that's how this was being reported, and I saw some people being like, what about Xbox? Didn't they do it for that too? Funny enough, Far Cry 4 was one of the games that FPS boost used, which, if you remember, when the Xbox Series X came out, Xbox had this tech that would take games from the Xbox One and even 360, I believe, and boost them to 60 FPS without any patches or work by the studio. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how the tech works. I assume it's some kind of machine learning, or the DLSS or FSR or whatever. I assume it was like an early iteration of some of that tech. But there were like hundreds of games they did that with, that you were able to play at 60 FPS on the Series X and S without any intrusion by the studio. I believe Dragon Age Inquisition was one of them. That game looks like hot garbage on the Series X, but it does run at 60 FPS. It just doesn't look very good doing it. But they did this with a bunch of games, and it's really cool. I think Red Dead Redemption, the old one, because they had FPS boost, but then they also had like a resolution boost thing that would make games look a little sharper, higher fidelity textures, things like that. It's one of those things that's really cool, and they had already done that with Far Cry 4. So I'm assuming they did not work on a patch for that because they didn't need one. And then finally, my updated thoughts on Clair Obscur and some news about Expedition 33. I'm on the last boss. And what's so interesting is that if you read some of the reviews about this game, people complain about doing too much side content and being over leveled, and the second half of the game just being like a breeze. Well, I did the opposite, and I golden pathed it real hard. And it turns out that I am on the final boss, the final fight. Literally, I'm going to beat this boss and then do the finale of the game. The game will be over, but I can't beat him. I've tried like 10 times, and I looked more into it. and I saw the level that most people are beating this boss at in the 50s, even like into the 60s. I'm level like 38. So currently I'm going back through and I'm trying to level my characters back up and get, probably to at least like level 50 so I can actually win, because I've gotten through there's so many phases to the final boss, and I've gotten through a couple of them and I just run out of juice. I just can't do it. So I will report back when I've actually finished that game. They did sell over 1 million copies. I bet they're getting close to higher numbers than that as we speak. And one of their developers has already come out and said that the chances are pretty likely that they're going to do some kind of DLC. I can see where the ending is going. I'm curious to how it actually ends. DLC and sequels for this game are going to be very interesting. What I will say is that Clair Obscur has 3 acts, and the first act, it was very kind of, it was great. It was so good, and it ended so well. And then the second act, you start to realize that there's something funny going on. And then the final act is just blows your mind. It's so cool, man. I love it. So I'm excited. I will probably do a spoiler cast for Clair Obscur once I'm done with it. And likely once I start a second playthrough. It has a new Game Plus system that adds new weapons and things like that. So yeah, it's a cool game. I can't wait to talk more about it, because the average person, even people who are playing it, most of them aren't far enough to realize what they're getting into. And I'm excited to see the conversation around it. Okay, moving over to some content updates. All I really have is that Doom, The Dark Ages, is coming out later this month. I'm going to check it out. It's almost certainly going to be a game I talk about here on the podcast. I would be surprised if I get really into it and like do a full review, but we'll see what happens. I'm not going to rule anything out. My plan for content really is going to be doing any videos as I see fit, either on gaming news, or if I can make up a reason to talk about Mass Effect, I will. I do want to keep streaming. I would love to finish my Mass Effect Legendary Edition modded playthrough. Hopefully this month would be the goal, as well as playing some other games on stream when I'm able, or just hanging out. Early in June, we'll be doing some of the showcase co-stream, so I'm excited for that. And that's kind of what we have coming up. And that is where we are going to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for watching it or listening to it. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bond Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members or Twitch subscribers. If you are interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, comment on Spotify or YouTube. Let me know in my Discord, or hit me up on social media at Baundiesel or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.